Hi, Rebecca. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Joby. Good to see you.
Yeah. Whereabouts are you? You're in South London today.
Yeah, I'm in East Dulwich. Feel like I've
Nice.
been staring at these walls for a long time.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I feel quite claustrophobic up here with no natural light in my studio.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun.
yeah. So listen, it's great to see you. It's been at least a year. It's probably been longer than that. I think I haven't seen you since 2019. Um,
Yeah, God, when did we last see each other? It's been a while. I mean, we've done work kind of over Zoom and over the phone, haven't we? But
we have.
yeah, I'm missing doing stuff in person.
Yeah.
That's what
It's
it's
a
all
pre-
about, isn't
it's pretty it's a pretty different experience.
it?
I mean, it works, but it doesn't work in quite the same way. I've
Yeah.
quite enjoyed being back in the odd studio with my percussion buddies, smashing things. But
Oh, nice.
yeah, but it's not playing at the back of an orchestra and hearing a wonderful string section or an amazing bit of eight horns playing one note or a choir doing its
Yeah,
thing.
that's what
Um,
we live for.
Sailor V, we'll all be back doing that before we know it. So I wondered if we might remember when we met, because obviously you wrote me this beautiful piece, which I've recorded on this new record. But I I certainly remember first hearing your music when I was standing at the back of our studios playing it for you.
Oh,
I think.
yeah, I think God, that was back in was it 2014, 2015, something like that. So we were recording my symphony, weren't we? And I'd gone a bit trigger happy with percussion in that. You had a lot to do. I think you were kind of running around doing. There were yeah, it was like 3 or 4 percussionists involved in that. So yeah, that was the first time we met, and then you got in contact not long after that, and talked about this project.
Yeah. Well, I was so pleased that you wanted to get involved because it was and having listened to your music after being in that session playing recording your music for you. um, I remember in that session, one of my colleagues and I were talking about the orchestration and the sort of the quality, the sheer quality of the orchestration that was to
Oh,
be heard. I mean, not in our parts, yes, but just as a
mm,
percussionist in an orchestra or in a studio orchestra, one of the things we get to do a lot of the time is listen, to listen to how the brass and the strings and the wind are interacting, and the
yeah.
sort of the quality that was there was just amazing. And it made
Oh,
me go off and listen to a bunch more things, and yeah, I was so pleased that you wanted to get involved in the Pioneers project. Um,
um, yeah, well, I've sort of been obsessed with orchestration since I was really young, and that's all about just like diving into understanding the instruments and learning more about them. But I think yeah, I was pretty relieved you saying that because percussion until that point for me, it had been very theoretically learned, so it had like a lot of time spent reading the books and trying to understand how these things work and the best way to write for them. But it actually wasn't until I got to work with you that I really, I was sitting down with a live player and saying, explain this to me, what's good for you.
Great. Well, I hope I could help. It's kind of.
You did.
Are there any specific books about percussion orchestration? I hear about various books, and I tend to hear that they're quite
Yeah,
old
I've
school.
got I've got a few of them. Yeah, I've got there's one specifically on writing for percussion. But the thing is, like, I mean, essentially you learn by doing, right? Um,
Yeah.
this is the thing. The more you, and that's why it's so important to get feedback, I think, when you can as well. So, like, particularly if I'm writing new concert works or anything, I will try and speak to the players and say, look, can you let me know what's working, what's not? Like, because otherwise, how you're just kind of blind the whole time. So, yeah, the feedback mechanism is really important.
Yeah.
At some point, yeah, you've got to leave the books on the shelf.
Absolutely. So the piece that you wrote for me, "Can't Sleep," for the solo piece for Pioneers, is a vibraphone piece, which is obviously the most gorgeous of all the mallet percussion instruments, certainly in my book anyway. What drew you to what drew you to that instrument as opposed to anything else?
Um, oh, I love it. It's really fun. Well, we had that session at yours, didn't we, where we sort of you kind of took me around the different options. You're like, oh, we could use a bit of this, use a bit of this. We talked about the bell plates. Like, I just, I think, well, I mean, partly like the vibraphone's got so much. There's a lot of capacity there. There's a magical quality to it. There's a fun quality to it. There are just lots of. I think in terms of like creation of a mood, it had a lot of potential for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just find it really beautiful. And I like the flexibility of having the pedal as well, so which can really completely transform the kind of piece you're writing, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, I get a little bit. It just does so much more than everything else. It has the sustain. It has the potential for vibrato. You can bow it
Yeah,
really effectively, and obviously you use bowing
yeah,
rather beautifully in your piece. In fact, I remember having to go. Well, I didn't have to, but I did. I made the effort to buy myself some matched bows of the same weight, and I did break.
yeah.
I broke two in the process, which were a bit too cheap, and I had to send them back and get some more expensive ones. But it was great because it means that now, whenever someone says, "Oh, can you do this bit of bowing?" and I've got my special vibraphone bows, which I know how to use because I had to do it for Becca. So it's great. But
Oh,
one of the interesting things, it seems like one of the challenges for you, particularly given that you write often for really quite large forces, and I think the things that I knew were these quite big, symphonic forces and big choral pieces. So you've got an awful lot of layers and room for harmony and counterpoint. And obviously, with just one person and a vibraphone, um, that becomes more of a challenge.
yeah, I
So
think that's why the loop pedal bit involved, right?
yeah, yeah, totally. So
There's
how can
only
you?
one. There's a way
Yeah,
around this, I'm sure.
yeah. So how was, because I seem to remember that for that was kind of a new thing for you to work with, the using a looper and
Looper
yeah.
pedal. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to challenge myself and do something completely different. And I was interested in exploring new ways of doing things. I mean, the other thing about this piece is that it's fairly minimal, and that's not often the style that I write in. But yeah, I wanted to do something in a different direction, see how this stuff worked. And I think because I had the opportunity to kind of interact a lot with you and go, right, how would this work technology wise, and what can you do here? And yeah, it was a good moment to be trying things, I think.
Do you remember if it was in any way uh restricting? I mean, pieces of music technology, when they're physical and not things that you can build, yourself, they have their limitations. I remember that. I think that looping box can, you can loop something, and then you can loop something that's twice the length or three times the length, whatever, but there aren't that many parameters. Was that restricting, or is that restriction actually quite useful?
it, it's super restricting. and and having one instrument is super restricting, but there is there's so much importance in the structure of things being restrictive, I think. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise you've got a blank page and you can just do anything. And actually to go, right, how can I make this work with looper pedal? Because we're not gonna, I can't stop this and then have this for these periods of time. It's gonna have to be this unit. So what can we do within that? How can I make it work on one instrument? Like, I think I don't know, to find interesting things you kind of have to have restrictions and structure, she says broadly. But yeah, it was both frustrating and helpful, I think, because
Yeah.
it gave me limits.
And where does the title come from? I know it's kind of, about insomnia, because obviously it's can't sleep, I can't sleep.
Yeah.
I think you you had been reading some stuff at the time, and that had sort of triggered an idea in your mind about the piece.
Well, I'd actually just been going through a bout of insomnia, and yeah, I was really there was a lot of that going at that point, where I tend to stay up quite late, kind of thinking about stuff, and um, it was just, yeah, it was quite frustrating, and the yeah, the kind of possibilities of vibraphone, of those kind of nighttime, just kind of repetitive, um I guess like sparks of idea and thought just integrated well for me. Yeah, so the idea was there's a long bowed note at the start, and that's, so you're basically lying in bed and you have this thought when you're supposed to be going to sleep, and then out of that trickles all these kind of sub thoughts and directions of that your brain starts going in, and that, and these kind of brain waves are going over each other, in this repetitive cycle when it should be quieting down because it's bedtime and it doesn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was from real life experience, I suppose. Yeah, and reading a bit about insomnia and kind of brain patterns and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I go through bouts of insomnia myself, but it seems to be kind of 3 months on, 3 months off. Do you is that kind of a similar thing, or?
Yeah, I think it's one I've got a lot of stuff to think about, or if there's a lot going on in my life, my brain just kind of wants to process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to know. I go through patterns. I find it's quite seasonal actually as well, because it's a lot to do with daylight and the kind of seasonal affective disorder type thing. Whereas
Yeah.
if I get a lot of morning light, then that seems to kind of jump my brain into realizing that by the time it's bedtime,
Yeah.
okay, now's the time to sort of quieten down. Whereas in winter, it's a whole lot worse, and it's just buzzing up there at night. I think a lot of people get that.
Do you get some of your ideas for writing in that sort of state?
Um,
Sparks of imagination. I mean, are you
yeah,
the sort are
totally.
you sort of person who kind of, you can't sleep, and then you kind of, something starts ticking, and then oh, I must have it's this chord, it's this idea, it's this little fragment of music, and
Yeah, 100%.
right.
Or actually, sometimes I'll be kind of like semi-dozing, and then I'll get a tune come to me, and I'll be like, "I can't get sleep. I've got to record it." Um, it's ridiculous. Yeah, but also, but funnily enough, I find one of the things that gets me out of those thought patterns is listening to music,
Right.
because music's very kind of emotionally regulatory. Is that word? It's, you can't kind of be going off at a million miles an hour if you're listening to something that has quite a sedate pattern. So yeah, I find music really helpful for me at night actually.
Yeah. Now, I know that you write. Well, I know that you write music for the concert hall, because you've done it for me, and you've done it for, your own albums and various commissions. But you also, work a lot in commercial music as well. So music for TV and film, whether that's composing yourself or arranging or assisting or uh,
Yeah,
whatever it is. I know that for many of our colleagues, that bit of commercial music often brings the insomnia, because we're working to such tight deadlines. What are the differences, or what are the things you enjoy about those two fairly distinct types of music making or creating?
um so kind of film and commercial stuff versus concert hall.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's whenever I have to try and tell people what I do for a living, then I sort of say I spend half my time doing commercial music, and
Yeah,
half my time playing on a stage of some description.
yeah,
And I suppose it's a delineation only in terms of their their different experiences for an audience, certainly, because
yeah.
one is done and produces recording, and the other one's hopefully soon to be again a live experience. But obviously, creating as a composer, creating music for those two things must be
Yeah,
quite different as well.
yeah, totally. Well, I mean, honestly, I love being able to have both of them, because actually there's a real synthesis that can go on between the two. You'd think they're kind of completely different, but the processes are so different. So with film TV, you're on such a swift turnaround, and it's very it's kind of the question is, you aren't thinking like, oh, is this developmentally interesting? I mean, you can try and challenge yourself within the confines of what you got, but it's basically, does it work for the scene? Are we happy with it? If not, let's try something else. Try something else 4 or 5 times potentially. So you have to be very comfortable with your work just kind of being jettisoned.
Yeah.
Whereas with concert hall, you're kind of like honing this thing that's being like very carefully polished over a long period of time, and of course there's no one telling you whether it's, like it's completely down to you, the shape that you'd like it to take. And yeah, and again, it's time as well. So it's such a quick turnaround with film TV that it's there's not really much time to. It's about speed of output often. Whereas with console hall stuff, you've got big deadlines very far away. So yeah, that's quite different. But I find the processes of the two are actually very helpful for me when I then go to the other. Because film TV just forces you to be putting out different stuff the whole time, and also like in every different genre. So I'm working on a documentary for the BBC at the moment, and I mean the last few weeks I've been writing. I've done Italian opera, I've done French pop, I've done like sort of Baroque string quartets, and I've been working with electronics. Like it's sort of madly varied.
Yeah.
Whereas with concert music, people, I guess there's a sort of an expectation of, you're writing the thing that is most directly kind of you, and the kind of music that, yeah. What was I saying? Lost my train of thought. But no, that's what I was going to say. But basically, having to do that stuff really, really quickly gets me creating a lot of small kind of kernels of ideas that can then become useful in terms of things I want to develop in a bigger way for concert hall later. So I suppose what I'm saying is I can get quite a few, I get forced to come up with a lot of stuff doing film TV, and within that there'll be kernels of like, oh, that's quite interesting, oh, I'm into that melody, and basically things that I'll bank and go, right, there's real potential for development there in a way that I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do with commercial stuff. So it's helpful having both.
Yeah, so you can end up with this big book of bits and bobs that you can kind of go to, maybe like a songwriter would with lyrics, perhaps.
Yeah, 100%. I've got my phone is basically full of like voice memos.
Nice.
They go, idea, or I mean loads of sort of banks of stuff from film and TV stuff where I've kind of saved the idea and gone use this later. And I think that's kind of how I think sometimes I'm most comfortable with that. If there's because the thing with concert hall is that it's a blank sheet of paper, right? You can do literally anything. So one of the things I like to do is kind of go through the existing bank of stuff and go, okay, is there anything that I'm interested to explore that could be appropriate here? So yeah.
I must admit, I find that doing the two things myself as a performer, that one feeds the other very much, and what I'm asked to do in the recording studio in the commercial world is creating ideas for stuff in the concert hall and vice versa. That might be techniques, instruments. I mean, it could be just literally anything at all. And I find it really a nice thing, because for me, all it becomes about is the creating something new, whether that's for a recording or for a performance. It's always likely to be a new thing with me. No one wants to hear me play music by old dead people. They wouldn't let me. Well, I think I've been labelled as that's not quite the right person for the job, but that's fine. And is there for you? Do you because obviously you compose in the concert hall? You're commissioned, or you've decided to write something, and it's you, and that's it, and it's 100% you. But obviously in your commercial work, sometimes you'll be there and it'll be your job as the composer, but other times you're assisting or you're arranging. What are some of the challenges? What are the things you enjoy about that? I know from our work together that you've done an awful lot of work with Alex Heffs over the years.
Yeah. Alex is amazing. I would sing his praises all day if I could. Yeah, he's been really really, really helpful to me, kind of being mentored by Alex. I mean, I've known him for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant composer, and he's very skilled as well at being parsimonious, at writing exactly the way he needs to for orchestra to get the body of sounds that's going to sound really effective within the constraints of what he has to do with film, and just making it work really smartly, which is, I'm not sure I'm articulating this well, but there's a skill in writing something writing quickly, writing in a way that has a complexity to it, but also has the simplicity that it can be appreciated on first hearing by the audience within the context of the film, and also played brilliantly straight away. And he's a master of doing those things. I've learned a lot just from being around him. I've been lucky to orchestrate for him, conduct quite a few of his sessions. He's just he's a very skilled musician, and it's lovely to work with him.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? I must admit that where I've learnt the most is standing next to my friends and colleagues who are playing the same instrument. I don't think I really know how to play the snare drum in the appropriate way, for a Hans Zimmer-esque snare drum festival. Unless I'd actually spent some time standing next to Gary Cattell and going, "All right, well that's how it's meant to be done," and you just sort of soak up these bits of these bits of knowledge, which is utterly fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And early on, you don't really even know. I mean, you're getting so much by osmosis, just being in these. Starting off, I was kind of making coffees and sessions and doing really straightforward. I was doing kind of MIDI cleanup for another TV composer and that kind of thing, but just being part of the world and seeing how the process works, and what musicians need, and all this kind of, it's immersing yourself in that. You're learning so much just being kind of next to all of these people. So it's really important developmentally, I think.
It's rare, isn't it? I think that there are composers who translate or cross that barrier, or able to straddle both worlds, as it were, really kind of effectively. When I think about it, I think possibly one of the most effective, certainly one of my favorite composers would be Toru Takemitsu, who wrote a lot of concert hall music, but also wrote quite a lot of film music, and was equally, if not fairly, successful in both. Are there any kind of models? I mean, John Williams is, I suppose, kind of the other one, but I think I might suggest he was a film composer in front of being a concert hall composer. Are there any people that have inspired you, or currently currently inspire you out there now doing
I
both
mean, I
roles?
would say that I've seen quite a few examples of it being done badly. Well, examples which will definitely remain nameless.
Okay.
But, I mean, I think something like, actually, a great example, which is more classic now, is John Davis, The Matrix score, which is full of really interesting techniques that basically would be more common in the concert hall.
Yeah.
Aleatoric and kind of contemporary minimalist stuff, and really interesting orchestrations, but worked so well for film and gave it a really unique score. But then he does a lot of ballets and a lot of really effective concert hall music as well.
Right. I must admit, John Davies.
Don Davis.
Don Davis. I don't know that
name. The Matrix score.
Which I know quite well. I don't always go straight to IMDb when I'm watching a film.
Well, he's not. I mean, he hasn't done much film stuff since.
Okay.
He's more in the concert world again now.
Right. Wow.
But yeah, he writes like really interesting scores that is kind of infused with the what you'd expect in contemporary concert music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that one. I'll tell you who I love. He does both really well. Is Joby Talbot.
Oh, of course, the other one.
Well, I don't know if there's a Joby versus Joby thing. You can't both exist in the same universe. It will spontaneously.
No, yeah, absolutely. We had one very confusing session at Abbey Road where I think the conductor decided to relabel me as, I don't know.
Really?
I think we did all the percussion separately for whatever we were recording, but we did the timps were done in the room at the same time, and it was Joby's film. I can't remember what it was, but I was playing timps, and yeah, it was fine. I mean, he wears a cardigan a lot better than me, but he's a lovely guy. Well, I can't. I don't think I can wear a cardigan really. But we were just about. We were nearly at college together. He was. I think he just left as I just started at the Guildhall, so we didn't quite cross over. But yeah, it's always. He's an amazing composer. Yeah, you're quite rightly. Yeah. Why didn't I think of that?
This concert hall music. His Alice in Wonderland score is just brilliant. Yeah, and a great orchestrator as well. So yeah, but there aren't loads of people who straddle both worlds. Super amazingly. I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting path. I suppose people occasionally get a bit labelled as they'll do this gig and they'll do that gig, but it's quite. I find it quite. I find it quite interesting working across both of those worlds, and I do find it feeds things. But it's yeah, really nice. So for anyone who doesn't know your music, it strikes me that the first person one might go and listen to is your Requiem. Well, it's certainly the first piece they might find. Because it's widely available in to listen to on all the streaming services, and I'll stick a link in the description so people can go and find it really easily. And it's this gorgeous piece, which is obviously a memory of your late mum. And I was reading, and I don't think I knew this, and you can tell me you will tell me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. That you just wrote this because this was something you felt you needed to write. It wasn't a commission. It wasn't I've got a record. No. I need to stick it out.
No.
I mean, that's kind of. It's a Requiem is always a big piece, and your Requiem is a pretty substantial piece of work as well. I mean,
you're like, why on earth would you write this giant piece without a commission?
Well, no. I understand why. I think I understand why you'd have written it. But it's a huge undertaking. So
yeah. Well, the answer is actually the very original version that I did was just for choir and piano, so it was a slightly less huge undertaking.
Right.
And then I did a version for orchestra, and then we sort of workshopped that, and then I was speaking to Decca about doing the next recording, and I was working with this producer who I think he does a lot of Puccini and kind of big Italian opera, and he kept saying like, "Oh, just put a few more instruments in." So getting bigger and bigger, but it actually started off. The original idea was much smaller. But yeah, so I mean, I guess it was part of the grieving process, really. I was writing back in 2013, 2014, and basically I had I'd written a lot from very young, so I had this big bank of stuff that then obviously kind of like infused with quite a different meaning now, because there were things that my mum would have heard, and I really I guess like I needed an outlet in the way I knew how to kind of talk about her. So writing the Requiem was that, and it's got I think I deliberately wanted to do something that was very. So my mum, she wasn't a professional musician. She loved music, but she basically just quite liked a nice tune. And so I wanted to do something that was very straightforwardly accessible, that anyone would be able to appreciate, hopefully.
Yeah.
And was just kind of full of strong melodies. And I had this bank of stuff, and it suddenly felt important that it had a home. So I think that was the motivation for writing it originally. But I think the advantage with that is that because I was just doing it out of this need, I hadn't really thought through the implications then of if it did go out in the world, because that seemed that was such a faraway concept at that point. I mean, I hadn't, I'd had a little bit of work performed in the concert hall, but I was sort of 27 or something, and I had no reason to believe that this would. I thought maybe I'd get the choir that I directed occasionally to put it on, and that would be it. But to believe that it would have this kind of public life would be a step too far to have thought about. So it was then a whole different thing to have to deal with the ramifications personally of this then coming out, this piece that was like intensely personal.
Yes.
And was very heart on sleeve, right? And I think that's we're always nervous about doing that as composers, and this was something where I really had just been. It's a very direct piece of music, and then suddenly it sort of got carried up on this runaway train of Decca wanting to bring it out, and I'm kind of going, oh my gosh, how am I going to feel about people hearing this? And because I set some poems as well that are they're beautiful poems, but again it's very heart and sleeve, it's very raw, all this stuff. So it was actually I think in the lead up to it coming out, it was a very anxiety inducing time for me, because your grief is being made public in a way that I guess I just hadn't anticipated at all when writing this. Although, you've got to, I suppose you write it because you want a public expression of it in some form. But that's, the ramifications of that definitely was something that I hadn't been prepared for. I mean, I have to say it was amazing and a big relief, the reception that I had afterwards, just in terms of the way that it connected to people. And I still get quite a lot of emails now with people sort of explaining to me what it means to them, and explaining their story, what they've lost. Actually, I remember seeing an interview with John Rutter where he talked about, he said when I wrote a Requiem, I didn't anticipate that people would be writing to me about death for the rest of my life. But it's actually, it's kind of amazing for me that it's, and I think it it sort of justifies the process that it's okay for me to have expressed it in that direct a way, because it speaks to what some people have told me they needed. And when it's quite an overwhelming experience still, I think, going to performances of it, because I'm sort of sitting in a concert hall with this music being played about my dead mother, and everyone's sort of having this experience. But also because a lot of people often come up afterwards and want to talk to me about their experiences as well, and some really, really tough things that people have been through and recent losses that they've had. So it's like, it's a sort of, it's a heavy world, but I feel really lucky that I've been able to kind of connect with people in that way, and that they feel safe to express these things and to relate like that, I guess.
Well, it's a really stunning piece, and it sounds like the experience was quite cathartic for you. Which is obviously your intention when you wrote the smaller piano and choral piece at the beginning. I remember when my dad died, which was I don't know, 5-6 years ago. The one thing I wasn't quite ready for was that people were, quite quite happy, quite happy to talk to you. But the thing that always seemed to happen was that they would immediately talk about their parent who had died or their close relative who died, and that was that. It's a bit like you're saying at the end of the concert hall. So you're sitting there going through this thing, and then actually someone comes to talk to you about it, but actually they don't really ask about. It's the other way around. They tell you about their experience, and that can be quite kind of like, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
it's weird,
strange
isn't it?
thing.
Because grief is like at once universal but also totally isolating, because no
Yes.
one had the experience that, like, they none of these people will, they didn't know your relationship with your dad, or my relationship with my mum,
Yeah.
or that everyone's experience is so personal, and that, these people are so irreplaceable and impossible to describe.
Hmm.
And so we go through these experiences, and they are in ways related, but also I completely get it. It's a completely isolating thing. Like, I'm glad, I feel like in a way we can understand each other, but also we're on different planets too,
Yeah.
because it's such, yeah,
Yeah. Such a personal thing.
yeah.
And I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and I love listening to it. I have listened to it several times. Um,
Oh, thanks, Joby.
well, good music is good music, and it it just sort of things translate, or um, I suppose they don't. Some things don't translate, but that piece certainly does, as does the rest of the record. But it's the other interesting thing about obviously that record is that you got signed to Decca, and that
Mm.
was a pretty big deal. It was 20, I think it was 2018 that record came out,
Mm.
and you got signed, but you're slightly bizarrely the first female composer to be signed to Decca
Yeah, they
in
they probably should have
2018.
got on that
Yeah, you'd imagine. I mean, there have
earlier.
been lots of really good female composers over the last however long.
Right.
I don't know how I don't know how old Decca are, but I mean, it's great that you were the first one. Was that a big thing for you, or I mean, obviously, Decca's a big record label, but how did you feel about that,
Um,
or just pleased, I suppose?
I think, I mean, honestly, when it happened, I was sort of like, really? Are you sure? Like, I was just kind of thrilled.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
yeah. But in terms of the female thing, yeah, it feels problematic to me that I was the first. It's very frustrating that we still have a problem with this. I think, as a female composer, you're torn between two worlds of feeling like, well, this is not my um, this is not mine to, hold up and represent. Right, the problem isn't our own. The problem is in the culture that creates
Hmm.
this.
Yeah,
And you know, I guess slightly rail against the label of being defined gender-wise, also simultaneously like recognizing the importance, and the crucial nature of having these conversations openly, because it's because we haven't that this situation has developed.
yeah,
So it's a complicated thing, but I think, yeah, and around that time, when it was kind of coming out and I was doing interviews and stuff about it, you get asked quite a few of these things, and it's really important to talk about it. But I think actually, in a way, I wanted to say, do you know what? The people you should really be asking are the gatekeepers. Like,
mm,
we should be talking to those people and going, well, why do you not have more female composers on your books?
yeah,
And, or commissioners, or do you know what I mean? I think female composers are on the receiving end of questions which the the people who are have more control over this environment um, don't necessarily have to
mm,
answer to. So yeah, it's a complicated thing, but it's so important that conversations are being had.
yeah.
Um,
I always find it a slightly difficult subject, and I think it's one of those things that
yeah,
people don't like to talk about too openly. So it's
yeah,
kind of,
yeah.
I think it's not an awful thing that we've broached it for a few minutes.
No, I think it's really important, and I think everyone has a different reaction as well. Um, like I think it's a really important subject to draw attention to. But there are there's like, I mean, I know like Roxana Panefnik is very specific about like, I never want to be referred to as a female composer. I'm just a composer.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like it's changing, right? That's the thing.
Yeah, totally. I think in a good way for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
I always find it a bit weird when the idea of going to a concert where the music's all by one group of people or another group of people. I mean, I'd like to go and
yeah,
see some really good music which has some sort of defining shape, whether it's all
yeah,
about it's all about sleep, or it's all about grass, or it's all about
yeah,
nothing at
yeah,
all. I mean,
yeah,
there seems better ways to connect music than that. Well, it's
yeah.
all it's all just pioneering percussion music. It's just as important, doesn't it?
God, that's
You know, and then, that seems like a better way
yeah,
of um
yeah. Um,
of connecting music and presenting it perhaps as well.
yeah. But actually, I'll tell you one thing that does frustrate me in this area.
Mm,
That I think basically because if you're if historically you've been coming from a default position of composition being a man's world that women are trying to break into, there's been there's kind of, I think there is, I'm just going to get on a site soapbox here. There's a kind of patriarchally influenced idea that women will then have to compose in what's deemed to be kind of masculine ways to be taken seriously in what was originally a masculine world.
yeah.
So I think there is a lot of there's a pressure on female composers to compose in certain ways that allow them to be sort of considered in a similar
Right.
way. I've read a really good article on this called something about candy floss and merry-go-rounds. I don't know, it's Googleable.
Okay.
But the idea that the idea of the genderifying of different types of music, which is of course completely mad. Like we just, we write music by responding in different ways. And I think I had God, there was a review for the Requiem on Amazon that started off with something like, well, men these days take themselves very seriously when writing, but the difference is that women write from the heart, or something like that. And I just thought, oh gosh, like we have to be able to write emotional music and it not be ascribed to a gender, right? Or something that's like, or something that's the type of music that we're writing can't be connected to, there can't be a shame around, right? Like if I want to write something that's really heart on sleeve, that has no relation to my genitals. That's just because
Yeah.
I feel like being a bit commercial at that point. You know what I mean? Like presumably like Elgar did. But yeah, it was. I think it's important that we like that these things are free of restrictions as well. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I think a person's voice is just their
mm,
voice, and it's born out of their experiences and their learning and their you know the way they were brought up, and where they lived and what food they ate and who their friends were, and that's what makes someone into a person, which then uh, finds something unique for them to write about in a certain way. And if it's
yeah,
interesting enough to everyone else, will listen to it, and if
yeah,
it's not, then people won't. And I don't
yeah,
think I don't think anything else much comes into it personally.
mm,
I don't well, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I recognize certain composers, like that, but
mm,
that's not. It's quite hard to recognize. There are very few composers who have their totally unique style. The one composer I think I will always recognize immediately, possibly with the exception of Bach, is Harrison Birtwistle, because it's just so you hear one note and you go, oh yeah, well that's Birtwistle, isn't it?
mm,
And it's not because it's it's not because he's a gruff old northerner. It's because
Yeah, yeah,
he's just developed this thing that he does, and it's got some archaic thing to it, and it's got a certain set of rules to it, and
yeah,
that's kind of it, really.
yeah. No, it's totally, the whole thing is totally bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um, really. But that's the, I mean, that's the great thing about composing as well. But it's just like freedom to write, and that's what I've always loved. That you can just sort of whatever is going on in the outside world, you just sit inside, and it's like, right, well, you do you. I'm just gonna, I'm doing my thing.
yeah, absolutely. Cool. So, we've spent 12 months inside now because it's the beginning of April,
Mm.
and what lockdown was March 23rd. I know that for some composers, the world hasn't changed that much because you're just stuck inside at a piano or a computer inside your same four walls. You just maybe going to less recording studios or less concerts. What's driven you kind of or inspired you in the last 12 months?
Mm. Um, well, yeah, I think you're nail on the head in that, like, during the first lockdown, I almost kind of felt guilty because I felt like I feel like I'm one of the people in the world that this has least affected. Like, pretty much as it was.
Yes. I've got quite a lot of composing friends who said exactly the same thing. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I get that.
Yeah, everyone's like, oh, this is terrible. I'm like, what's, yeah. But no, by the second lockdown, I was, tearing my hair out, as we all were. Yeah, so I think I just carried on as normal for a while. But I mean, I'm really missing concerts and live music,
Yeah.
and just interacting with musicians, the things that inspire you normally. Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky. We had the international premiere of the Requiem in Canada just before the first lockdown hit.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, sort of went there, but I mean, that's quite overwhelming because you sort of are in this big situation, and then you kind of go back into your hole, and it
Yeah.
almost feels like a dream. But yeah, it's been tough. The last few months, I've basically gone back to, because I had some time in summer. I was like, well, what do I really love doing, and what do I want to write?
Yeah.
And I've gone back a bit to just finding that stuff and trying to kind of get to the kernel of things that I want to do, separate from what I'm supposed to be doing, and just kind of rediscovering kind of like why I like writing, which I think is an opportunity that it's brought. But yeah, it's been tough for everyone, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And then yeah, the recent lockdown, I've been working on a series, so I guess I was kind of distracted from the fact that I was basically locked into these four walls. But,
just doing your work.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I'm kind of like I work quite intensely. Like if I'm on a project, I'm just like I sort of shut the outside world out, and
Yeah.
I'll just I'll just do it, and I won't see people for a while, and then I kind of like emerge like a mole blinking in the sunlight.
Yeah. Well, I'm really
yeah.
grateful. I'm really grateful you made a little bit of time to do this because I know that you're in the middle of it right now. So,
Oh,
um,
cheers. No, it's my
so
pleasure.
what's next? Obviously, there's the documentary you're working on. Is there another record for Decca, or is there more concert music coming? Or
So I've got they're doing a concert of my work at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, as a choral society. So I've got a few things to do from that. I'm writing a kind of concerto for cello and choir with orchestra. So yeah, I really need to finish that because I think they need to start rehearsing. So let's probably go on that. Yeah, so I'm finishing that, and that's a really nice opportunity to just.
can you tell us who the cellist is?
We actually haven't decided yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
Right.
on in November.
Great.
So I'm going to finish the piece,
Yeah.
and then we'll have those conversations.
Nice.
Yeah, but I think that will go on the next recording as well. I'm doing what else am I doing? Album stuff, orchestral commissions, choir commissions. I'm writing a musical.
Are you? Wow. What's the musical?
Yeah. Musical. Oh, I could talk about the musical
I don't
forever.
really
Um,
like musicals, but
well, musicals are very controversial. So my thing with musicals is I think my theory is that we all have there was a period of time when we were growing up when our kind of critical faculties hadn't developed and we just loved the stuff that we were connecting with as kids, right? And
yeah,
those things stick with us, and we always kind of have an affection for them.
yeah.
And for me, it was musicals.
Okay,
I went to see a lot of musicals as a kid. I was in a lot of musicals.
okay.
We listened to a lot of musical theatre soundtracks. So I guess it was always like quite a safe place for me.
Nice.
So I've always wanted to write a musical. And I mean, there's musicals and musicals, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, something like, Bernstein West Side Story is, I hope, even as someone who's not a fan of musicals, you could
Oh well,
sing.
I must admit I am softening in my old age with two teenage children now. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so
That
yeah,
was
I've been to West End shows in the last few years, and I've enjoyed.
mm.
I must admit I've enjoyed them.
Oh. Keep it to yourself. Yeah, be
Yeah,
careful now.
I won't tell anyone. Can't hear it here. Um, yeah, I find that I think that's really yeah. I mean, Bernstein's amazing, but even a lot of the a lot of kind of classics, the things that were made into TV shows in the '60s,
Mm,
not TV shows but into films. They are pretty amazing. They they work on quite a set of different levels, and
mm,
I suppose it's that thing about being able to connect with a large audience as well.
yeah.
It's not. I mean, it's not ballet, it's not opera. It's a lot more congenial to talking to a mass audience, which is
Mm.
hugely important. Yeah, and of course I know Bernstein. It's pretty good, isn't it? He did. He did a.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
Um,
did a few great scores. Um,
yeah. Like I'm sort of obsessed with West Side Story School
oh,
because
really?
it's basically because I mean he's a symphonist, right? He wrote a score that was essentially symphonic, is modulating all over the shop,
Mm,
and at the same time manages to be full of catchy tunes.
yeah.
I just the skill in what he did is yeah, he is something special. But having said that, you can't really write musicals like that these days. You wouldn't get away with it. So
Too many
I'm
musicians.
what?
Too many musicians. I think
Oh,
it's quite big, isn't it? That is a theatre.
yeah.
There's that great video of him conducting. It's I can't remember who the singers are. Is it um I can't remember. I want to say it's the really obvious people whose names are I can't recall. But he's talking to the orchestra, and he's having a go at one of the percussionists who can't play the triangle and do something else at the same time, and it's hilarious. But it's difficult. I'm sure it's Kirito Kanywa and Jose Carreras, but maybe I'll just totally make it
Oh,
up. I'm
I think
sure.
there's something where he sort of shouts at someone, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's probably a
Yeah,
percussionist.
yeah, yeah.
But it's
Also,
well, it's got to be that with a trombone player. But it's I remember seeing that and being kind of amused by it. But it's a very difficult. I mean, lots of musical scores are, but it's quite it's quite an old one. It's quite a historic piece of
yeah,
um,
yeah,
thing from that art form, and
yeah.
I think it's got quite. I think it's not like it's 20 musicians in a pit. It's bigger than that, and
Mm,
it's a tough
yeah.
thing. It's a tough thing to play, and you've got Bernstein sitting there going, "Come on, get it right, do this." You know, he was kind of king of New York for some time. I think it was probably a
Yeah,
reasonably good description
definitely.
of him.
And he was scary
Yeah,
when he was conducting. You're gonna get that stuff right. Yeah.
absolutely.
But what do you love playing on, JB?
What do I love
What's
playing on?
Yeah, I mean, what is really exciting to you to be involved in? Because you do so much different stuff.
Um, yeah, I think the things that I love the most are just being excited in the moment. And people will often say, what's your favorite piece of music you're playing at the moment?" And I kind of have to say, well, it's the one on the stand in front of me right now, because
Oh,
otherwise I don't feel like it's getting enough attention. Or if I
yeah.
don't really care about even if it's I mean that we were doing a thing for Marvel last week, and it wasn't. there wasn't anything horribly difficult, and I actually played bass drum, Grand Casa and bass drums for the whole day, which I don't get to do very often. But it was fantastic, and it was beautiful to hear this music and to to make sure I was working with Bill, who plays the timps, and kind of form that part of the section. And for me that day, that was the most amazing thing. And conversely, the next day, the which was actually, I can't remember which day it was, but anyway, the next day, I went off to a venue and we filmed 4 brand new solo pieces, sort of roaring around with lots of electronics and different mallet instruments. And I've been through the process of working with those composers in the way that we did, or similar to the way that we did, over many months. Well, actually, it was all through lockdown, so it was all Zoom calls basically, apart from the bit in the middle where people actually could come to the studio. Um, and that was equally beautiful and a lot more tiring and a lot more energy. But in those moments, those were the most important things to me, and they were both. That was hugely enjoyable, and you know, um, the next challenges will be this will be enjoyable as well. I suppose I feel reasonably fortunate that most of the things that I get asked to do are things that I like to do. I like being in a recording studio with the red light on, playing something I've never seen before, because there's a challenge of being able to read something very fast and be able to get enough information from your ears and your eyes to do the appropriate thing. And there's something lovely about being in the room with a composer or a producer and crafting a piece of music for performance or to go on tour. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
wasn't going to talk about that much with this piece actually, but I mean that was so, because we spent quite a bit of time together trying different stuff out, and certainly there's a bit at the end of the piece where we were talking about how to make the end of the piece work, and there's definitely there's the Joby influence in there, like in bringing that together. Yeah. Do the syncopation stuff that builds.
Oh yes, yeah. Okay, yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
That bit.
And it was it was I learned a lot through doing that and just kind of working together in a way that is really it's quite a rare thing actually for a composer to be able to do that. So that was really lovely. Like we definitely get as much out of it as you do, if not more.
Yeah. Well, I think for me it's the most enjoyable bit of the job. So I thank you, and I thank everyone else who puts up with me.
Well, yeah, the album's awesome, like all the other stuff on it as well, JB. So congratulations.
Oh,
it's
thank you.
really exciting.
Well, go and stream it, everyone. Love it. Rebecca wrote this amazing piece. It's on it. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat.
Oh no, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's a pleasure. I can speak to you soon and see you for a drink or a cup of tea or something nice.
Yeah, that'd be nice. We're allowed to do things soon, aren't we?
I hope so.
That's the dream.
Go sit in the garden. Cool. Yeah. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye.